Hello, hello. This is Depression Vacation we go. Dun 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 dun. Hello, hello. It's Sunday time.
It's the remix.
This is the remix of. That's the Snow White song. Is that what that is?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We better be careful though.
Oh yeah, we've already angered Spotify by having Taylor Swift on our podcast. So
yeah, you know, when she was here and talking about Taylor Swift things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I really thought I called Spotify's bluff on that one. And
you thought.
It's so weird the way they did it, though, because they definitely didn't take it down during the time frame they said they were going to. And then just like low key, I noticed we were short an episode on our catalog. And I'm like, when did they did this like sneakily? I mean, can it be sneakily if they say that they're going to do it?
Well, I mean, kind of. I don't know. It's not fully sneakily. You know, that's not 100% capacity sneak.
It's sneak adjacent.
It's like sneak level 90. I don't know.
It sounds like a Dungeons and Dragons. Like,
yeah, I was thinking of Skyrim.
that works too. But anyway, it's kind of a gross fall morning out here.
It is.
It's rainy. It's cool. After it was like 80 degrees the last week. I have been very busy doing the VidJam screening stuff, so I haven't had time to work out. I feel very sluggish and sloppy and very tired, but looking forward to that's going to be tonight, although, you know, this will be on the airwaves tomorrow for Monday. But I'm really looking forward to that because that's what I've been doing for the entirety of the last 3
October.
weeks. Yeah, it's funny when we finished our movie and I was kind of like, yes, all I have to do is like get the screening in order now. I have 3 weeks to do that. And then 3 weeks was not enough time because like we also like at my behest, because this was my idea, I offered to print out like actual full-size posters for anybody who designed a poster. And that took a whole week to like resize, print out, and get correct. Then the screener, which is 3 hours and 52 minutes, is still exporting right now.
Dang.
So the original estimate it gave me was 92 hours, and I got it down to 14.
Oh, boy.
So, yeah.
Oh, my gosh.
How are you, Shannon?
I'm doing good. Had a decent week. And now I've completely forgotten everything I've ever done. So I don't know what to talk about. But this morning, I finally decided, you know, when that feeling that you're not getting into a book and you finally decide, like, I'm putting it down. I'm not reading it anymore.
Yeah.
That was me with an audiobook I've been listening to. And I should have known better because I read a book by this author before and I did finish it, but I didn't like it. And so I wanted to give him another chance and I did. And it wasn't I was not having a good time. So this morning I was like, nope, I'm going to put it down. So that was a pretty good feeling.
I do that with movies or TV shows occasionally, more TV shows than movies. Books I've generally always been, I can't think of a book that I started that I didn't finish. Because I've generally been like, yeah, if I start it, I'm going to put the time into it regardless. It's like a sunk cost fallacy. I haven't finished book series because like Wheel of Time, for instance, got to be too much after book 6. So I was kind of like, yeah, not doing this anymore. But yeah, if I pick up a book, I'll finish it just out of stubbornness.
Well, I used to do that. I think we've talked about this before, where I just very recently have come to the grips of being like, you know what? Why am I doing this if I hate it? So So I'm just like, there are so many other good books that deserve to be read, and so the time that I spend not reading bad books, I can allocate towards reading really good books.
You said something really interesting there I want to touch base on, like, why do this if you hate it?
Right.
And I think that, like, because that kind of reminds me of, like 7 years ago, towards the end of, like, a particularly devastating, like, relationship and then breakup, I was trying to do a feature film that we got, like, 40% shot, and it was driving me absolutely crazy, and I hated it. And my girlfriend actually asked us, like, why do you do this if you're not, like, having fun doing it? And at that point, I kind of wanted to still make it into a career, whatever that means. But that was like one of the most profound thoughts, even though I'm not with this person anymore. And it was kind of like, if you want to do this, you should do it for fun, which, again, I reevaluate that every VidJam again. But the more interesting thought, I think, there is like, are we conditioned to just do things we hate?
I think definitely that is the case. And I think a lot of that has to do with work culture. because and also, I find that this is a thing in relationships too, where people tell you to hold out because there's some big goodie at the end for it.
Yeah.
And here's the thing is, like, first of all, with like work culture, they say like, oh, everybody hates their job. Like, we've made it into a whole meme that people hate their jobs. And it's like, but why? You know, like, if you hate it, then there are other jobs. And I think that's a new mindset that's coming up in the workforce now.
Yeah. Especially now, like.
Well, especially with that idea of like quiet quitting and all that kind of thing. And I love what I'm seeing on like TikTok, where I see there are people who are putting in their 2 weeks notice with air quotes, but actually just being like, okay, I'm out of here. And the employer's like, no, you have to give us notice. And the person's like, well, you wouldn't give me notice if you wanted to fire me. So like, why should I give you notice? And they always say it's about like leaving on a good note and like having a good reference and things like that. But it's starting to become more of a thing that like people are like, well, I don't really need a good reference if I already have the job offer.
It goes the other way too. Like, I've seen lots of employers like get really, in fact, there was somebody who worked my position a few years before I got to where I'm at. And she also, like, to be totally fair, was somebody that apparently like had some some attitude problems with a lot of people on the staff and everything. She was always nice to me. But again, like, my work relationship with her was not in a supervisory capacity. And when she put in her 2 weeks notice, they told her just to take her leave and go home. And they were actually pretty like, I remember I got an email because I was still working for WITF at the time. And I got an email saying that this person had been removed from lottery and not to allow her on the premises for WITF anymore. And I was like, well, that seems like overkill. But it was just like a lot of bad juju back and forth. So,
well, and when it comes to leaving for another job, there are some industries where conflict of interest, and I think probably the lottery is, you know, a huge place for that. Like, if you know someone is leaving in like an environment like the lottery, like, they could very well sabotage things.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So like, I've seen the same thing in finance, where especially if you're leaving for a competitor, they're not going to keep you through your 2 weeks because it's a conflict of interest.
Yeah, that's actually that happened with Lauren, because she hired, I want to say this was a head housekeeper or maybe a front desk agent about a month ago. And she was coming from another hotel, and she tried to do the right thing and put in her 2 weeks notice. And the other hotel fired her immediately. And they were like, no, just get out of here. We don't want you. Yeah. And I was like, okay, I guess she gets to start working for you a week early then. So.
And that's what I did when I switched banks, is that because I gave my notice. Now, you have to give your notice in this case because they won't pay you for those 2 weeks unless you give notice. So I gave my 2 weeks notice, but then the same day they were like, okay, no, we're just going to send you home. You know, we'll pay you for the 2 weeks that you gave us the notice for. And that was, it worked out for me because then I started like a week early. So I got a week where I got paid for 2 jobs, and I was like, hell yeah.
And then a week where you got paid to do no job.
Exactly. See, it was so beneficial. But I think something that's really important for anyone who's in the workforce now to really recognize, and especially for people like me, like in our age bracket, like millennials, Gen Z, and on, I'm seeing this mindset shift where, like, I was always raised that, like, in a workforce environment, like, you don't rock the boat or anything like that. Like, you do your job and you're accommodating and that kind of thing. And I think that comes from also working in like customer service jobs.
Oh my God, so much.
but since I've kind of had like my big girl jobs, I've noticed that like I never really saw myself as like a commodity to the company I was working for. I just kind of saw it as like a I need them situation, but I'm really starting to shift my mindset with that and realize that, like, no, they need me.
Yeah, this is something that comes up actually talking with, because Lauren has had a lot of issues with her particular job lately. And I guess I can talk about this a little openly because she is going to be taking another job, I believe, soon. And it's one of those things where, like, she clearly is a linchpin that is holding a lot of that hotel together. And the people who run it do not care, do not recognize that. And even worse, like, are just sort of like emotionally abusive to her. And so she's kind of like, oh, I'll take this job and shove it. And she was saying that too. Like, the thing is, like, when you're in an abusive work relationship like that, it's like being in an abusive relationship where your own self-worth is being beaten down so that you don't look for another boyfriend. When in reality, and she was saying, it's like, after I had these interviews, it was refreshing to hear that, yes, I am a commodity and yes, I am an asset, and it's not the other way around.
I'm talking to a friend of mine too, that she's looking to be promoted within her company to something that is like, she's put 15 years into the company. It was her first job. Like, she started off at like 16, 17 years old in this job.
Wow.
And 15 years. And she has gotten to the highest position that she can possibly get on the level of being like on the ground, like in the store environment. And she's applied for other things that would be either in higher performing markets or anything like that.
Okay.
And she keeps not getting like the job. And the thing is, like, she's done she's been ranked like top manager of the year. She won the first year. She was runner up this year. Like, she has put so much of herself into this company, and they're not investing in her.
Yeah.
And she's finally starting to be like, well, if you're not going to invest in me, I'll find somebody who will. And I'm like, that's exactly how you should be. Like, if these companies have no loyalty to us.
Yeah.
We are loyal to them for what?
See, it's weird because it ebbs and flows a little bit with my particular job. Like, I've definitely had times where I have felt exactly that way. Like, I don't feel valued. We're not being told what we need to be told or things like that. But also, like, there are times where we feel super valued, for instance, and like things sort of congeal and work together and are more harmonious. So like, and I've been at this job by far the longest of any job I've ever been at this point. And it's kind of like, I have taken interviews occasionally and looked at other places and then ultimately decide not to, because like the more I evaluate my job, the more I realize it's really interesting. It's a good job and I like it. And there are a lot of like hassles and stuff like that, but that's kind of like typical of any job.
That's the slippery slope, though, is like, you have to make sure that your ratio of your personal fulfillment versus like the tough times is well balanced, or even, more in the benefit of your personal fulfillment than it is for the other thing, because
it's a very delicate dance, essentially.
Yeah, because I mean, that's another thing that you hear about. So as I mentioned before, like marriages, they're always saying like, oh, well, everybody has a hard marriage. Like everybody, like you hate your spouse sometimes, and it's like a whole meme. It's like, oh, I hate my wife, or all that kind of thing.
Oh my God, there's a hilarious I think you should leave sketch, which actually features somebody who was a bit of a friend of mine when I was in LA. Have you seen this show at all? Or
no, you've talked about it, though.
Oh, I talk about it way too much. Yeah. But the joke is that like they're all at a poker game and they're like, oh, I hate my wife, and then he joins in and is like, oh yeah, you should deal with my wife, and then all of a sudden he looks to the side, he gets super guilty, and they play like a 10-minute flashback of all the times like his wife has been super supportive to him, and then at the end he's like, no, I gotta go home, I love my wife, I don't hate her, and all the guys are like, we were just joshing around, man, we don't actually hate our wives.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, is like it's I think that the culture shift is pervasive. Like, I think now we've got wife guys that then eventually cheat on their wives.
Yeah,
apparently.
I was going to say, I don't buy the wife guy thing at all.
And have you noticed how every youth pastor is a wife guy?
Yeah.
I've noticed that because I've been going to Ryan's church on occasion for holidays and shit. And I like to go to church to reaffirm my belief in not believing in God.
Yeah.
And so, like, every time we go, they're like, all of the pastors there are like super into their wives. And I'm like, this is so on brand for you.
Yeah.
And the thing is, like, I do find that I'm enjoying seeing how relationships are evolving. At least what's at the forefront of like pop culture and like what I see on TikTok and things like that. Because when people are talking about like marriage, it's like, yeah, well, you have your ups and downs and then it gets better, or it doesn't, and you just stick it out. And I'm like, well, but it shouldn't be like that. And like a marriage, the intention of marriage is to have a positive relationship. Of course, in any healthy relationship, there's going to be conflict. It should be productive conflict.
Yeah.
And, but you shouldn't feel beat down by the other person. Like, it should never come down to them like making you feel like shit. It should be just be like, hey, things are hard for the both of us right now tackling this issue.
Yeah, I remember one of the more profound relationship things I've ever heard actually came from you on this podcast like months ago, where you were like, I wouldn't get married if divorce was not on the table. And that actually, like, that spurned, like, I heard some things from other listeners too, talking about how, like, that was a very good way to look at things, because you have to actively choose to be in this relationship forever. You're not trapped in it, which is, that's something else that's coming up this week too, because our new Speaker of the House, among other, like, hardcore Republicans, are sort of coming after no-fault divorce.
Yeah.
Which is something that's so ridiculous, like, I can't even fathom it. Like, oh, you just want your wives to be indentured servants for the rest of
right. Now, I want to, like, kind of amend a little bit of, so this year, going through premarital counseling and being engaged and all of those things have been incredibly transformative for me.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, I've had so many mindset shifts and just understanding different things about myself, which has been super important and cool. And one thing that I recognize is, like, yes, divorce should be an option, and you need to come up with your boundaries and communicate those boundaries, as we discussed last episode, to be able to have a healthy relationship, so that your partner knows, like, okay, these are the circumstances in which we would get divorced. Like, that needs to be clearly communicated. So as I was, Ryan and I had a little bit of conflict after one of the episodes of the podcast, where he heard me say, you know, like, oh, people just grow apart and things like that. And Ryan was very shaken by that, because he comes from a very traditional
yeah, I've sensed that.
Yeah, traditional environment. And he was like, you know, I don't think I could accept that as a reason for divorce. Like, I don't, to me, it's, if you can't just wake up one day and say you don't love me anymore. And I'm like, okay, it's not quite like that, but
No.
I see, you know, that this is important to you, and so let's discuss it. And he said, like, I don't think there is anything that would come up between the two of us that wouldn't be reconcilable, except in these cases. And then we set those boundaries, and we said, you know, this is when it wouldn't be okay for us to move forward. And it basically came down to, like, abuse or adultery and that kind of thing.
Just the standard
right
things that,
Yeah, and so I had always said I wouldn't get married unless divorce was on the table, and I've kind of restricted that idea in the sense of, like, what I just said in terms of setting the boundaries and making sure that, like, you know, I do see this as a more firm commitment, where, like, okay, maybe, you know, not liking you for a period of time might not be the lead to divorce, but, you know, that's something that we would have to approach. But I think I'm kind of I've become a little bit more open to the idea of, like, not getting divorced as long as it's healthy and appropriate, you know, for the couple.
Yeah.
The other thing was, I had always said, like, I do not want a joint bank account. I always said I don't want to combine our finances. Like, I want a joint bank account that we use for, like, bills and things, but I want my own separate account, and you have your own separate account, because that's how my parents did it in banking. That's how I've seen it be successful. But Ryan made it very clear. He was like, that's not an option for me. Like, I need to have joint finances. And so I had to decide, you know, is this something that we can, like, am I going to compromise on this? And if so, why am I going to compromise?
Yeah.
And what it came down to was that, first of all, my parents have both been divorced twice. So what do I know about marriage? I know jack shit about marriage. And also, it made me kind of realize that the way Ryan saw marriage was that, you know, we are really and truly a team, and that everything really and truly is shared. And I've fought with that concept for such a long time, because I felt like it was antiquated. I felt that, like, oh yeah, you know, what's mine is yours is a little outdated. But I found that as we have integrated our finances and things like that, it doesn't feel like a what's mine is yours situation. It more feels like ours
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does. You and Ryan, I will say, I mean, I'm not privy to the like most inner workings of your relationship, but as far as people I've seen in relationships go, like you seem to have an unusually good rapport with each other, where you do seem to talk about these things, you complement each other well. And I kind of like, in my limited, again, viewpoint of your relationship, would agree with Ryan there, because it seems like you two, more than pretty much anybody else, I feel could work out most issues, except for like adultery or like abuse.
Yeah.
But I can't imagine either of you being abusive to each other, which is that's why it's almost funny to. I mean, it's never funny to throw abuse out there, but in your case, it's sort of like, oh yeah, one of them's going to become abusive with the other. No,
it's one of those things where like, but even though I think it's important that you state your boundary and state your value,
yes.
and so like, yeah, I don't think Ryan's ever going to abuse me, but I still need to communicate that is a boundary for me, regardless. And I think that's, really important. The other part of that is, and I said it and I just felt so poignant, and I can't think of what the other word is, but I felt so smart.
Profound.
It was very profound. Thinking about the finances and the divorce, and I always saw myself walking into a relationship where, like, yes, we will get divorced if we fall out of love with each other, or like if XYZ happens. And then, we're going to have separate bank accounts. And the way that I saw that was security, because I saw it as a back door. And that over the last year, what I've realized, for me anyway, and, it might resonate with other people. And if it does, great. But I realized that security wasn't having a back door. Security wasn't needing a back door.
Yeah.
And like
that's a good way to put it.
But the thing is, like, I've been in survival mode for a decade or more, or 2 decades. And like, when you grow up like that in an environment where you're constantly trying to survive and trying to adapt to a situation to save yourself, like back doors, you're always looking for them. And putting those to the side and like trusting has been probably the scariest thing I've ever done. And it took a lot of work to get to this point, but it's super, like, it feels fantastic just realizing what security really means.
I feel like everybody needs backdoor. Like, I mean, I can't see what my own backdoors are, because sometimes you're blind to them. But like a discussion Lauren and I have had a couple of times too, especially as she's been looking to move out of Pine Grove, is like, at this point, we've been together a year. We both really like each other. We seem to complement each other well. We don't really seem to argue very much because we're kind of on the same level. And then I've actually floated a few times like, hey, why don't you just move in with me instead? Like, I got a big old house. Like, you could have your own room here so that we could have our own separate spaces. And she's brought up a bunch of times that, like, because, she's divorced as well. And she said that she just, like, I think her backdoor, she just doesn't want to live with somebody. Probably not forever, but at least for a while. Like, and I totally understand that too, because, like, living by yourself allows you the space to, like, live the way you want to, for better or for worse. Kind of just do your own thing. So yeah, I kind of get that. Although ultimately I would like my partner to move in with me.
Eventually.
Yeah. It also would be helpful financially too. So.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think it's so funny when you think about kind of these mindsets and how things have changed. Because when I look at my childhood and I look at the experience that I have with marriage, and then I look at Ryan's parents, it's like 2 different worlds to me, because I just couldn't fathom like being married 30 years with the same person and like not ever getting divorced. Like, I
hope that's your and Ryan's.
That's what I want. I told him, I was like, I'm hoping it's genetic and that it just comes with the package.
It's that's kind of, my parents at this point, they're approaching 40 years. I think 39 was their anniversary this year. And they've had a very, like, they've had a confrontational relationship with each other at several points, mostly when you were raising young children, because that's stressful for everybody. And I think that specifically my dad had a lot of bad coping mechanisms, but like both of them probably did, because also, like, the boomer generation has not been raised quite with the same level of awareness as us. And hopefully we say that about us in like 30 years or so. But like they say, like, I remember when I think it was like when I was 24 or 25, about the time my youngest sister was like out of the house and going to college. My parents had mentioned, it's like, oh yeah, we discussed the possibility of getting a divorce when like all the kids were out of the house, but then we decided we liked each other. And I'm like, that's beautifully sweet in a nice way.
That is really sweet.
And not to say they don't fight, because they bicker all the time. A lot of it, I think, is my dad's fault, just being there, because a lot of it is just like him not listening or not considering her feelings. But it's also kind of just his personality not to react to anything. So they have their disagreements and everything, but they seem like they're pretty ride or die with each other, which is sweet.
That is really sweet.
Yeah. I mean, the way that they got there wasn't perhaps always the healthiest way to run a marriage, but the end result was okay, I think.
And something else I've been thinking about a lot is, we always talk about like the healthiest way to, you had just said like the healthiest way to run a marriage. And
I don't think there is a healthiest
no,
way.
there
for
isn't.
Sure.
And that's something that I don't know if I've talked about this before, but like I've really been working on the concept that I realize I overregulate myself. And in any time I run into an issue where I feel bad, or like I've been upset by something, somebody says something mean to me, I don't react right away, and I immediately go for the path of like what I think is like diplomacy. Like I never like just be mad about something or sad about something. Like I don't dwell in those negative feelings. And I've talked about this before, where I kind of just like, oh no, a negative thought, and then I swerve. And I thought that was me being healthy, like being able to manage my emotions and react in a way that would be the most healthy way in that situation. And I think it's taken a little bit away from what I can experience as a person, and from, being able to be uncomfortable is something that I guess I never really thought that I was bad at. And then when I actually took a look at it, and I was like, oh shit, like you hate being uncomfortable, you hate uncomfortable situations. That's why you're always saying the thing that you think is going to smooth things over. Yeah,
there's so many different layers to that. Like there was one of our coworkers who he's mostly good for the most part now, but for like a year and a half, he kind of just lied to get out of every situation. He was a bit of an older guy, still is, because he's still alive, but like I said, a lot of times he would just sort of like lie about something that he couldn't possibly have any hope or expectation of getting away with, like just to get out of a situation. And I'm always sizing people up. I'm trying to like understand, like, why does this person do this when they had no legitimate chance of getting away with like just lying about the number on a sheet or something like that. And what I sort of landed on was, this is somebody who doesn't like being uncomfortable. And in the event that, because he quite frequently would make mistakes, he's very uncomfortable. And so basically he's just trying to get out of that situation as quickly as possible, not thinking what future him is going to have to deal with in that moment, because it's going to be worse. He just can't deal with it in that situation, which, did not explain or did not justify the bad behavior, but it helped understand him a little bit more. Like, this is just somebody who hates being uncomfortable. And yeah, a lot of, I think the worst tendencies of mine are just like, I don't want to feel uncomfortable in a situation. Like,
yeah. And I think, so like, I was talking to my best friend about this recently, because she had said that someone at work or something had spilled something on her, and she, like, the person apologized, and Cassie said, oh, it's fine. And then the other person kept apologizing, and Cassie was like, she had a moment where she was like, wait, why am I like doing my best to convince this person that it is fine? Like, yeah, it's like, I'm a little upset about it. I'm allowed to be upset about it. And it's not about like beating up that person and saying like, oh, you're a piece of shit for making a mistake. But it's also like, oh, doesn't that suck? Like, I feel like we're in the interest of making other people feel better. We don't allow ourselves to be upset about a thing.
Yeah, I think some of that comes from family dynamics too. Like, they're definitely, I think a lot of my sense of humor has evolved from that exact sort of thing, like trying to make people feel better. Like, I think I've mentioned before on the podcast, like years ago we were watching like old Christmas videos, and there was like one year where I want to say I was like maybe 7, Kathy was 5, and Christy was 3. And for whatever reason on Christmas morning, like both of them were crying about something. And then I would just walk over and be like, oh no, look, you got this really cool thing. Don't be sad.
Yeah.
You got roller baby. That's still like a joke in my family. Is like, Hal, you were so excited that Christy got roller baby for Christmas.
Yeah.
Roller baby.
Yeah, well, and of course, I recognize that my reaction to negative situations is very much a product of how I grew up. Like, growing up, anything that happened, like anything negative, in my mom's mind was specifically engineered by me to hurt her. And so I kind of ended up being trained to, first of all, take responsibility for everything and say like, yep, that's totally my fault. I'm so sorry. But also like try to assure the other person that I still loved them and that like, it's like, no. And of course, my mom was one of those people who was like, oh, I'm the worst mother in the world and blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, no, you're a great mom. And that was a lie. And it's like,
Oh no.
she was very much not.
Yes, I can gather that from.
And it's just one of those things where now I take it really badly when I do something wrong. Like I beat myself up so much because I see mistakes and accidents, even though they are what they are. Like they are mistakes and accidents. But I immediately am like, I'm the worst person in the world. I did this on purpose. It's a frustrating thing to break out of. And and that's been hard in our relationship too, where if Ryan says to me like, oh, hey, Shannon, you forgot to do this, I'm like, that's because I'm a terrible person. And I did. And he's not trying to make me feel that way. It's just how I was trained to feel in those situations. And so relearning how to understand those situations is a chore, an actual chore. It's so, and the thing is, like, I thought I over analyzed everything before, and now I'm over analyzing and then trying to recreate a new response to a thing.
Yeah.
And it's exhausting. It's absolutely exhausting.
So I think that, like, going back to something you said a little bit ago, where you were saying sometimes it takes me a while to realize I was angry at something. That was I don't know if I still do this or not. I think I've gotten better at, but that was my entire, like, life philosophy in general was like, in the moment I wouldn't get mad about something because like, oh, they're just doing their best. And then the more I think and ruminate on it, the more I'm like, oh, they're doing this just to spite me or they don't like me or something like that. And I think it's gotten better because I haven't had those thoughts or those experiences for a while. But it kind of reminds me of, like, I always used to use this as an example for me not realizing something hurt me until later on was like, when my dad tells a story all the time, like when I was a child, in the basement of their old house. Like, he was watching me for a weekend while my mom was away, and I was downstairs just continually slamming my hand in a door down there over and over again. And it was like, I don't know how old I was, like, but it couldn't have been more than 3 or 4. And like, my hand was all bloody and he had to take me to the hospital. And he said a couple of times, like, I wasn't like crying or hurting or anything. I was just sort of fascinated by the fact that I was slamming my hand in the door over and over again. And he said that the doctors came to him and was like, yeah, usually we would call CYS in a situation like this, but like, your son is like laughing and he doesn't seem to be in any pain whatsoever. So, and I've always thought that was an interesting allegory. It's like, yes, I don't realize something hurts me in the moment.
Oh my God. That's
a story.
That's a story. That's damn. I don't know how to respond to that. You good, Hal?
I mean, the answer is debatably no on any given day, but
fair enough.
But for right now,
oh my gosh,
I've got coffee. We're in a warm studio.
Yeah,
it's
I mean,
company.
Kids do some fucked up shit, man. Like, kids are just.
See, I can't imagine that because, like, after spending a couple of years with like 2 little boys, like, anything that hurt them, they were pretty good at expressing it. In fact, even things that didn't hurt them, they were good at expressing it. But like, I can't imagine like not like feeling pain over something like that. So
yeah, I mean, I definitely have some similar stories of like just unsettling things that I did as a kid that were like,
you okay, Shannon?
I'm good. Like, you all right there, buddy? When I think back on a lot of things, I mean, and it's weird to kind of, because a couple of times, like, of course, therapists are always like, oh, well, write about it. And I'm like, oh, like, I could write about it, and like, I would have enough for a pretty decent like novel if I tried. But what's really difficult is like the physical trauma that's come from the actual trauma I went through, like, is that like I don't have really good or reliable memories pre the age of like 12.
Yeah.
And
That's
so it's
weird.
yeah, and so like a lot of things that I know about myself from before that age are like secondhand, but the thing that really sucks about it is like it's secondhand from the perception of a person who is insane, and everyone else who was in my life before then like wasn't close enough to see if those things actually happened or not.
Man, that's a mind fuck of a way to live.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like I just it's really weird because when I think about it, it's like that didn't happen to me. Like that was an entirely different thing. I heard about it from somebody else, So, but like there are a lot of different stories that my mom likes to tell that are kind of in that similar vein, but like I couldn't fucking tell you if it's right or wrong.
What that kind of reminds me of is in Scrooged, where like Bill Murray's childhood was so traumatic to him that when he's talking about his life to the ghost of Christmas Past, he's just repeating things from TV shows he watched. It's like, that was happy days. You didn't actually live that.
Yep, that's how it feels, actually. Not gonna lie. Yeah, it's really weird. And the thing is, like, what's so frustrating about it is when I do find out that things that I thought were true are not, because it is stuff like, because my mom pulled from a lot of pop culture to like fill in the gaps. And so I would tell a story and they'd be like, that sounds like super familiar. Like I know that from somewhere. And I'm like, oh man.
Yeah, it's. I mean, you had an upbringing that was more of a mind fuck than pretty much anybody I've known in that situation. So, like, the layers boundaries between reality and fantasy were non-existent.
Yeah,
they all congealed into one Frankenstein's monster of a childhood.
That's a really good way to put it. I didn't. Yeah.
Yeah, it kind of reminded me of like a Haruki Murakami. Have you read any of Murakami?
I haven't, but my friend Cassie loves those books. She loves him.
It sounds like a very pretentious thing to say. Oh, have you read this Japanese surrealist author? But I would not know who he was, except like when I was in college, I took a class which was supposed to be just Asian literature, which gives you a lot of leeway as to what you want to teach. And the teacher just taught us Haruki Murakami novels. Huh. So I read like 8 of them that semester, and I was like in love with how like bizarre they were, how surreal, like the layers between reality and fantasy were non-existent. And he has just such inventive like idea. I haven't read any of his books since, and he's only grown more prolific since then. But yeah, if anybody's looking for a mind fuck of a book to read, read like A Wild Sheep Chase or Hard-Boiled Wonderland by Haruki. They actually made one of his books into an Oscar-nominated movie a couple of years ago called Drive My Car, which, of course, I didn't watch because I'm a lazy consumer of media. So
yeah, it's okay.
I'd rather just watch the same 100 Halloween movies that I watch every single Halloween.
Yep, fair enough.
Which is what I've been doing this month, by the way.
Yeah, I watched a few new to me movies over the last month or so. I just watched Nope.
Oh, that's on my list. I've wanted to see that I was actually just talking about this movie to a coworker the other day.
It was good. I liked it. I don't think it's Jordan Peele's best, but I mean, it's still pretty solid. And of course, I love the cast. It was fantastic. And it was just like the right kind of weird, and I liked it.
Yeah, I have my unpopular opinion for Jordan Peele is I think Us was a significantly better movie than Get Out. Like, Get Out is a very good movie. It didn't blow me away. And I think the reason it's so, like, it blew so many people away was it is a very poignant and very good horror movie that came absolutely out of nowhere from this guy who was just a comedy actor.
Right.
And I think that shocked people so much that they loved that movie. And it's a very, very good movie.
Yeah, it's very well done.
It's very arty. It's got an interesting story. It's very subversive. I think Us, as far as a movie in general, is just so much better. Like, Lupita Nyong'o, fantastic double lead in the movie.
Yes.
Even Tim Heidecker, who's a little hit or miss for me, is pretty creepy and funny in that movie, too.
Yeah. I really enjoyed... I mean, I love Jordan Peele. I've really enjoyed his horror, like as he's been branching out. And another movie that I watched recently, which was kind of like it's been on my list for a while, and I never had gotten around to it. Vivarium. Have you?
I don't know if I've heard of that.
So it stars Jesse Eisenberg and Imogen Potts.
Oh, two people who I thought were going to be like a lot bigger in 2008.
Right,
so.
yeah. So this came out within the last, I want to say like within the last 5 to 10 years that it came out. Probably feels more like 5. I want to say this was like 2017 maybe. Oh, no, that would be more than 5. Anyway, I watched it recently, and the trailer, when I watched it, really drew me in. I was like, oh, this is creepy and weird, and I kind of like it. And the movie delivered.
So Vivarium, I'm going to write that down.
It's honestly, and it came up on Netflix as like a really strong match for me. So again, this was based off of like my personal preferences of horror films, but I felt the cinematography in it was super well done. It took so many weird twists and turns, had an ambiguous ending, and I was like, this is pretty solid. So
I love it when movies do that.
Yeah,
surprise.
and Jesse Eisenberg wasn't as awkward as he usually is. He played more of like a, I don't know, like a normal person. I don't know how to explain
They've
it.
definitely, like, I feel like people like Jesse Eisenberg are just sort of cast into a corner for their entire life.
Yeah.
Like, he played, I can't even remember what the first movie I saw him in was. It might have been Adventureland, actually. And he just played, like, because he played sort of awkward, semi-intellectual person so well in a couple of movies, and then The Social Network.
Yeah.
That's all same with Michael Cera. I feel like Michael Cera was done a huge disservice by Hollywood because Superbad and Arrested Development were so, he played one character type so well that he just played that everywhere.
Yeah. But now when I there's this YouTube channel that I really enjoy for analyzing horror films. It's called Found Flicks.
Oh, okay.
And he did an episode about Vivarium, and he like didn't like it as much as I did, but I mean, I think it was well done, and I was intrigued the whole way through. So I definitely recommend it.
It's funny because this actually reminds me of Damian Robinson had a thread last night. I don't know if you saw this, where he was asking like what your favorite or what horror movies you saw as a kid that scarred you, which I thought was a really interesting conversation. And for me, Event Horizon is the number one for sure.
I have to give that one another watch. And I think I mentioned this before on the podcast because I had also asked people at one point on my Facebook of like, what's the best horror movie you've ever seen? Or like the scariest horror movie you've ever seen? And all, like a bunch of people, like my dad included, said Event Horizon.
Yeah.
And I watched Event Horizon and I was like, I don't get it. But
the blood orgy didn't scare you?
But that's what I'm saying. Like, I think maybe I was asleep or something.
Maybe.
I might have to give it another watch. But as a kid, you know what fucking fucked me up when I was a kid? Gollum from Lord of the Rings.
Okay, I could see that.
I was fucking terrified of him. And my dad had it doesn't bother me anymore. I've seen it too many times.
No, I can't scare Shannon then.
Ryan actually asked me, he was like, how many times in our life are we going to watch Lord of the Rings? And I'm just like, do you want me to answer that question? Because I feel like you probably don't.
I just rewatched Lord of the Rings a couple of like months ago. It still holds up. Like
it holds. I've seen it. I rewatched all the movies probably, if not, well, since dating Ryan, not as often because like you need a lot of time for that. But
oh yeah, clear out your day. You're gonna spend 12 hours.
Yeah. So I mean, I would say it used to be like a yearly thing. I'd at least pop out Fellowship of the Ring.
Yeah.
But anyway. Yeah, so my dad used to have a little statuette of Gollum on his desk in his office at home, and I very much did not like to go into his office to ask him anything, and he spent most of his time in there because my dad works from home. But yeah, I did not dig that.
Yeah, Gollum was very... I remember when because he doesn't really appear at all in Fellowship of the Ring. Like, there's a little bit... You see glimpses of him, but you don't really see him in the first movie. Mm-hmm. And the only frame of reference I'd had was the Hobbit movie, which was like the cartoon.
I loved that.
I love it too. And I was picturing Gollum. Gollum is a lot more fish-like in presentation there. And so when I read the books, that's exactly what I was imagining. And then when Gollum is like a person in Lord of the Rings, that was
unsettling.
Like, it was a bit of a game changer because I was like they do mention in the Lord of the Rings books that he used to be something Hobbit-esque, but like, again, the fish man image made it that to me that was very far removed. And by making him look more human, they gave him more humanity. That was a weird, duh thing to say.
No, but I get what you're saying for sure. I mean, like in the animated film, I Gollum I didn't really think much about. But like then, we get Andy Serkis and fucking what monstrosity CGI. I mean, the CGI was really good, but what I'm saying is the monstrosity meaning that it scared the fuck out of me.
Yeah. There were a lot of like I was actually just talking about this with regards to some of Scorsese's movies with a friend of mine, is that like a lot of the people in Scorsese movies are underratedly hilarious in certain scenes, which is more unsettling, I think. Like, and with Gollum, there's a lot of that there with him too. Like, for instance, when he's singing his fish song by the waterfall, it makes it more unsettling because you see like the full, like, yes, this is a monster, but also he's just so happy to have caught a fish. Like,
that he's gonna just...
Yeah. Then we breaks its neck.
Yeah. Gollum just, my inner child is like cowering in a corner. I hated him so much. I mean, I don't mind him so much now, but he still gives me the creeps from time to time.
So what Halloween movies do you like, since this is Halloween?
Halloween.
Yeah.
I am a sucker for some of like what I consider to be like old standbys. I actually I hadn't seen like Casper in like fucking...
Casper was on TV the other night and I watched that.
I hadn't seen it in fucking like 10 years and I made Ryan watch it and it was hysterical because like I'm rewatching this and I'm like, okay, as a film, it doesn't necessarily scream masterpiece, but...
It was never a masterpiece, but it's a solid movie.
Right, and we had fun and I kind of, every once in a while when we do watch a movie together, I do tend to like MST3K it and I'll kind of tell all the jokes I've said in my head for the last few years, but since Ryan's never heard them, I feel like such a genius.
You are a genius. A very stable genius.
I try to be. So we watched Casper recently and I was like, that was pretty solid. And I like Hocus Pocus. I showed it to Ryan and he was like, I don't like it. It doesn't appeal to me. I was like, you're wrong, but okay.
Hocus Pocus, I didn't know this, but that was like a huge bomb when it came out too. That it only got popular because they aired it on the Disney Channel like all the time. They also released it in summer, which like, why? I don't understand the trend of making holiday-centric movies and then releasing them outside of the holiday. Like Surviving Christmas, which is... not a good movie, but also one I love every year, was released on Halloween the year it came out. It's like, it's a Christmas movie. Make it Christmas.
Yeah. Let's see, what other... I mean, in terms of horror movies, I just genuinely enjoy many horror films. And I've talked about a lot of the ones that I really do enjoy.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we have entire episodes dedicated to Stephen King, so...
Right, but I'm trying to think of, like, Halloween-centered movies.
Specifically Halloween-centered movies.
Yeah, so, like I said, Casper is kind of... Like, I see that as more of a Halloween movie than anything else.
Yeah.
Hocus Pocus, definitely a Halloween movie.
I actually just watched one of the new Halloween movies. They made an All Hallows Eve 2, which had nothing to do with like Damien Leone or Art the Clown or anything like that, but I watched that the other night because it was like maybe 8 vignette movies, and one of them kind of scarred me a little bit. Like the very first one, it's like a woman with a young son who's just like a cute little kid who reminds me of the other little boys I know, and they're carving a jack-o'-lantern and then they bake the pumpkin seeds and he eats some of them and the dog eats some of them and she eats some of them and then their stomachs explode with pumpkins. And the last shot of the movie, like after she dies and after the little boy dies, the dog lays down and then they show the outside of the house and you just hear the awful like that dogs make whenever they die in movies.
No.
And I was like, I don't eat pumpkin seeds, but I'm definitely never going to now.
One movie that I was thinking of was, so what came across my mind, I've only ever seen it once and I saw it for the first time within the last like 4 years. Trick or Treat.
I've heard good things about Trick or Treat.
And yeah, I thought it was decent as a horror film. But have you seen, there's a slasher flick coming out that's Thanksgiving themed?
Yeah. Do you know what the story behind that is too?
No. Please tell.
Oh, okay. Are you familiar with the Quentin Tarantino, Robert Rodriguez experiment Grindhouse that came out 16 years ago?
No.
Okay. So Grindhouse was like this attempt for them to put together a theater-going experience that was like going to one of these cheap movies in the 70s. And it was my friend Steve and I went to go see it in theaters because it came out like a month before we graduated college. And it was a double feature. Like Robert Rodriguez did a movie called Planet Terror That was a full hour and a half movie. And then Quentin Tarantino did a movie called Death Proof, another full hour and a half movie. And they were a double screening that they had to be packaged together. And then they had fake trailers for movies in between and at the beginning of all of them. One of which was also Machete, which then became its own like franchise. Rob Zombie did a trailer called Werewolf Women of the SS, which was Nazi werewolves.
I've heard of that.
And then Eli Roth did a trailer called Thanksgiving, which is what they're finally putting out. And it was like frightening and horrifying. Like in the fake trailer, for instance, they kill the grandma and then cook her turkey style and serve her on the table, among other things. And Thanksgiving was the trailer that we thought was the most shocking of the bunch.
Well, I watched the trailer for the film that's coming out, and
it's a different trailer than the original.
Oh, well,
yeah.
I didn't make it through the whole trailer. I was like,
Yeah.
I couldn't.
Well, that's why the Thanksgiving one was the one that like scarred us the most, because we're like, yeah, that was gross. Like,
and it's so weird because like I've seen nearly, because the newest one just came out, nearly all of the Saw films, and I couldn't get through this trailer.
yeah, it's interesting enough, I went through all the Saw films at the beginning of this month, except for the most recent one, which I'll see when it comes on demand. And they were not as hard of watches as I remembered them being. Like,
I think the first time you see it, it's like, oh, I've never seen that before. And then like you're like, yes, and now this is the part where they rip the jaw in half. Like, like I guess after the first time you see it, it's kind of like, because I really, the only Saw film I've gone back to rewatch was the first one.
Yeah.
Because I think that one, I mean, I just think it's so simple and so like I love the concept of the first film.
They made it for like no money.
I know.
It was.
But why did they have Carrie Elwes in it? We don't know.
Yeah, that was. I remember when we saw that in theaters. I did not think it was that bad when I watched it just recently. Mm-hmm. But like the scenes at the end where Carrie Elwes is like having his like blue screen of death moment and breaking down because he thinks his wife and kid have been killed. Mm-hmm. When we were in the theater, people were laughing at that because he overacted it way too much. But then watching it on my own in my house, I didn't think he did that at all.
No, I think he did a great job.
Yeah, but the Saw movies are. It's weird to say that they're kind of almost tongue-in-cheek-ish because they involve horrible torture and body mutilation. Mm-hmm. But there's something about them that it just doesn't seem like it's 100% serious, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I can see what you're saying there. I mean,
it's not like Hostel or Human Centipede where like the vibe is very like dire all the time.
Yeah, I would say with the Saw films, the thing I think that it's these films, and then there's another film that is similar in why I'm fascinated by it. It's called Would You Rather. And
yes, I saw that recently.
With Brittany Snow and the guy who played the penguin from like Gotham.
Yeah, and Sasha Grey is in it too. Because she was trying to be a legitimate actress at one point. Remember that?
Yeah. So like I always wonder to myself, like, what would I do in those situations? And like most of the time probably would die. Mm. But like, because there's a scene in Would You Rather with the razor blade.
Yeah, and the eye. That's on the post. I thought so interestingly enough, when I watched Would You Rather, I don't think I would classify that as a horror movie necessarily, because the bulk of the movie really takes place with all of them at the table. Mm-hmm. And it's a thriller. There's a little bit of body horror in it. But I don't think I would classify it as a straight-up horror movie because it's very slow burn. Also, it has a completely... The ending of that movie did not need to be as depressing as it was, I think, too. Like, it was like, we've already seen enough stuff.
You kicked us while we were down.
Yeah, it felt completely unnecessary, and it felt contrived. And that was the only thing I didn't like about that movie was the ending.
Well, yeah, and it's like, we went through all of this, and you're going to... Really? Like, are you serious?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Some movies do that well. Like The Mist, for instance, kicks you while you're down at the very end, but in like the most heartbreaking way possible. For art's sake, I did not feel like Would You Rather did that. I felt, like you said, kicking us while we're down.
Yeah. Rude. Of all things, first of all.
An interesting, something you had mentioned too before, like when we were talking about Casper, and I mentioned I saw that on TV. I've been going through some movies I hadn't watched since I was like a teenager when I saw them on TV recently too. Like I saw The Exorcist.
Oh yeah.
And watched Nightmare on Elm Street last night. Mm-hmm. And I missed a lot of these movies seeing like the TNT edited version of them. Like there was so much stuff in The Exorcist that I mean, I know obviously like the masturbating with the cross scene, for instance, but I hadn't actually ever seen that because I saw it on the TNT.
Yeah.
And so many of the like blood effects in A Nightmare on Elm Street I hadn't seen either, and it was a much more violent movie than I remembered Again, because I saw it on TV.
Well, and Nightmare on Elm Street ranks pretty highly for me as a film that actually did scare me.
Yeah.
And the one, and have I told you about? I feel like I've mentioned it before, but the scene that really got me, and I don't know why it was this scene in particular, but Nancy, right? That's the final girl's name.
Yeah.
She goes
I'm
out.
your boyfriend now, Nancy.
Yeah. So she goes out into the hall, and there's a body bag on the floor. And all of a sudden, the legs of the body bag, like, flip up like they're being, someone's lifting up the legs of the body bag. And then she gets dragged off screen. And I don't know why, but that just really got me when I saw Nightmare for the first time.
It's a scary, so The Simpsons, for one of their Treehouses of Horror, did a Nightmare on Elm Street parody with Willie, being Freddy Krueger, essentially. And the parody that they did of that, they said that on the commentary, they got a lot of comments from people who said their kids were traumatized by just
The Simpsons.
The Simpsons parody, because there is a lot of, obviously it's a horror parody, but there were some scary things they threw in there. And I think as far as a pure concept, Nightmare on Elm Street might be the best horror, concept of all time.
I really... I would say Nightmare on Elm Street is one of my favorite horror films. Another one that's more Halloween-y for me, I guess, which I love, House on Haunted Hill.
You like the original, right?
I do like the original.
I've never seen the original, but I've seen the remake several times, which I also really like.
Yeah. Ryan and I recently watched, and it was the first time I'd seen it in 5 or 10 years. But we used to watch it all the time when I was a kid. Private Eyes with Don Knotts and...
Never heard of this.
I'm trying to think of what the other guy's name is.
Was it a kid's movie with Don Knotts?
No, not really. It was kind of... So I see it as kind of like a horror movie. But... Okay, it came out in 1980, and it was Don Knotts, and I can never remember the other guy's name.
Andy Griffith.
No, Tim Conway.
Oh, I know.
Yes.
So, Tim Conway, another comedic act. The funny thing is, everything relates to The Simpsons for me, and the only thing I remember Tim Conway from is he had a brief guest spot in a Simpsons episode.
Oh, okay.
Where the joke was they were doing a spin-off of The Simpsons for the Brady Bunch hour sort of thing, and Tim Conway just happened to be the guest star for their show that week. But he was a Carol Burnett performer, right? Because he died a few years ago, and everybody mentioned that he was a big mainstay on the Carol Burnett show.
Yes. So what I love about this film, first of all, it has 83% on Rotten Tomatoes, which I think
that
is
means
super.
A lot.
Well, but what I'm saying is I feel like that's super high for a Don Knotts film.
Yeah.
But it's a classic whodunit, and it's it says Scotland Yard sends a goofy pair to check on foul play at a mansion outside 1920s London.
Ooh, okay.
And it's they've got Don Knotts as kind of their Sherlock Holmes-esque character, and then Tim Conway as the Dr. Watson-esque character.
Which is funny because both of them are very American too.
Yes, which is hilarious. And they do address that. They're they sent the Americans to come solve this murder.
From Scotland Yard.
Yes, it was hilarious. I loved that film so much, and it still held up after all this time later. And I was just so thrilled.
Yeah, I think I really enjoy, and this is where you and I are of the same mind. I like the spooky and scary movies the best, really. Yeah. Because I don't know, they just sort of do something to me. Halloween 4, I've talked a lot about too, as being my favorite of the Halloween movies, which I actually just watched it again a couple of nights ago, and then I watched its direct sequel, Halloween 5, because they're kind of there's different Venn diagrams of Halloween movies.
I've seen the flowcharts.
And the flowchart for those are 4, 5, 6, the Danielle Harris ones where she's his little niece that he's trying to kill over and over again. And 5 is not a very good movie, but 4 is a very good movie. And it took me a while to understand why until I watched them back to back. 5 has a ton of comic relief in it and a lot of wacky moments with for instance, they have 2 deputies that are dumb policemen who are clearly there to tell jokes and break up the mood. But Halloween 4 does not have any of that. There are some moments of levity, but there's not really any joke or anything in it. And I think that that's part of why I like that movie better, is that it doesn't... You can do comic relief well, but there is a lot of condescension sometimes. I feel bad for saying this, but Raw Digga in 13 Ghosts I would consider to be bad comic relief, for instance, because she's so out of place, there's a lot of bad elements to her performance in that movie. Same with Halloween 5, but I'm trying to think of movies that had good comic relief, actually.
So the thing is, like, I don't really see it as comic relief. I just think that the best horror films that have comedy in them, like, you don't really pick it out and say, like, oh, yeah, that's the comic relief.
Yeah, like, if you notice it, it's too overbearing.
Right. So, like, for example, I think a good example of this is, like, the newest It films, like the Chapter 1 and 2, where it was more about a coming of age story. And like the in Chapter 1, all of the funny moments were because they were happening to kids, and kids just generally are hilarious and do stupid funny things, and it was very natural to the story, and it wasn't like set apart from what was happening. It was just like, these are kids being kids. If a scary entity was trying to kill them.
Yeah, it's funny. I think I still have not seen the newer It movies.
Oh my God, you're doing yourself a disservice.
I know, and they popped up a couple of times, but I was like, I don't feel like digesting a new movie right now. And I love It as a story, too. Like, I love the miniseries, I love the book, and I've heard the movies are very good. And
they are very, very good. The cast is incredible. The filming, the cinematography is incredible. Like, there's nothing I don't like about the new It films.
You like Bill Skarsgård, too.
I do well, but that's different. I just like Bill Skarsgård, but he does a fantastic job as Pennywise.
Yeah, I think I'll have to give that a watch maybe tonight when I'm done with the VidJam screening and all of that.
Yeah. Well, and listen, I don't want anybody to come for me for this, because I love Tim Curry. Don't get me wrong. I love him so much.
Very different approach to playing the clown, though.
I'm sorry, but like, Bill Skarsgård just really cemented Pennywise as a villain. I just felt like Tim Curry's... I mean, it's a different kind of villain for sure, but I was more intrigued by Bill Skarsgård's interpretation.
It's fair to point out, too, that as good as Tim Curry was with his particular version of it, it was a TV movie.
Right.
And it was like a colossal... I didn't realize this until I watched the documentary they did on it on Splatterbox last year, but it was the highest rated TV miniseries of all time when it debuted. And, the acting quality and direction for a made-for-TV movie are definitely more on the ham it up side, which I don't think Tim Curry hammed it up in that movie necessarily, but there is a bit more of a vulgar and directness to his performance that, like, in films you tend to get more nuance, but for made-for-TV movies you just kind of have to get it out there. And he was still very scary when he needed to be.
Well, me personally, I was never truly scared of Pennywise with Tim Curry, but with Bill Skarsgård's Pennywise, like, he was genuinely... I like how he interacted more with the kids and then with the adults. Like, there was more interaction between, and it was like the stakes were a little bit higher, it felt to me, in that way, because there were some intimate moments where he literally was like face to face with these kids, and like it was fantastic and amazing.
That is a very interesting point that I didn't realize with like the TV series. It is that a lot of times it does feel like Tim Curry is not acting in the same room as the children, because it's just like close up of him, close up of kids, reverse shot or something like that.
Yeah. After you watch the new It films, check out some of the like the behind the scenes of Bill Skarsgård talking about acting with the kids, like with the child actors, because there are some really good moments that he talks about that like really just speak to how good these kids are as actors.
Yeah, I know Finn Woodhead, is that how you pronounce his name?
Finn Wolfhard.
Wolfhard, yeah. I know that he's one of them. And then two of the kids from I'm Not Okay With This are both in it.
Sophie, I'm trying to remember what her last name.
Yeah, one of them plays Eddie Kaspbrak, I think.
Yes, Eddie Kaspbrak, the actor who plays him, is phenomenal.
Yeah. I really enjoyed... That was a TV show that I had totally forgotten about until just now was I Am Not Okay With... Did you ever watch that?
I haven't, no.
Oh, it's a fun sort of like... also LGBTQ
Sophia
friendly.
Lillis.
Yeah.
Lillis. Something.
It's about a girl, like, I think she moves to a small Pennsylvania town and realizes she has superpowers. Right around the same time, she's also realizing that she's attracted to women and stuff like that. And
I saw the trailers.
I watched it once and totally forgot about it, but it was a fantastic series that, like, and one of the fun subversive things is the guy who plays Eddie Kaspbrak is like introduced as sort of like a possible love interest, but then as she's figuring herself out more and more, she decides he's not a love interest for obvious reasons, and then he's okay with it too. And I'm like, this was a good way to do this for this particular
just
thing.
one thing. Okay. Actually, so I'm going to correct you because I'm thinking about it.
Is it Stan?
It's Stan.
Yeah.
Yep. Wyatt Olaf. Because the guy who plays Eddie Kaspbrak, I do. The actor who plays Eddie is fantastic.
This is why we needed Wallace here, because Wallace
Jack
would be like,
Dylan Grazer. Jack Dylan Grazer is fantastic, and then Jaden Martell is fantastic. I mean, all of them are just so good.
you know what? I'm going to watch this. I'm off for a week. I'm just going to watch these two movies.
Do it.
But anyway, we have a couple of minutes left because I still have to go do things
Yes.
I have to work out because Hal has not really been good with his exercise routine lately.
Go Hal. Go work
Yeah.
out. Hooray.
Got to be able to fit in my chairs, you know?
Yep.
But anything you have coming up that you want to talk about?
Just my wedding.
Just the wedding.
You know, it's
just
in less than 2 weeks now,
just
so
theoretically one of the most important days of your life.
it's all I can think about, honestly. I'm surprised we haven't talked about it even more than we already have, and I'm sure leading up to it'll be even
and this
more.
is an hour
Yeah.
of therapy for us every week. So
Yeah. No, so I'm looking forward to it, but as for like creatively, not much going on.
Yeah.
No.
I don't have anything because the VidJam screening's tonight, which means everybody is going to hear about this tomorrow after it's already done. But we had our first Offbeat show with Ryan I wanted to talk
Yeah.
about real quick because Ryan was fantastic. The piano stand collapsed like 3 times while we were trying to set up the piano. And the first time it happened, I was like, oh, Ryan, you didn't tighten it enough. And I feel like I was a little annoyed with him. Because also the owner of the theater was in the back, and I was like, this doesn't look good that we're breaking his piano. And then it happened like 2 more times, and thankfully Ben had the idea to just put it on chairs.
Yeah.
And Ryan, considering the piano was like not even close to where it comfortably should have been resting, played really well. I'm really happy to have him as part of the team, and everybody really likes him because he's a likable guy.
He's so great. That's why I married him.
I know.
Yeah.
Yeah, if that doesn't work out, I might marry Ryan. So.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I think that's fair.
But anyway, we've had a fun hour of being people together,
Yep.
so, you know,
It's been fun.
stay warm, stay dry, enjoy spooky movies, and, you know.
Happy Halloween
Happy
from the
Halloween.
Depression Vacation podcast.
Yeah, I'm doing my first trick-or-treat in my house.
Oh, that's exciting.
Like, Lauren and I are going to carve pumpkins and then dress up in something. I'll figure
love
it
it.
out. But anyway, yeah, I've been Hal,
I've been Shannon.
and have a wonderful week, and we'll see you next week.